If you listen to the show, you already know that we cannot exist without our sponsors. They are the ones who make things happen behind the scenes. So let's acknowledge Fuji Sports. We've been working with these guys for a while now, not only as far as this podcast is concerned, but also at the RŌL Academy. We've had their gear. I personally use their gis. What a phenomenal product.
Yeah, I mean, Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, MMA, tape, bags, anything you need for your Jiu-Jitsu journey, you can find at fujisports.com.
Let's talk RŌL TV. There's so much content on there. It's ridiculous at this point. But I think what is even more intriguing, as time went on during the project, we've been recording most of the events that were taking place here at RŌL Academy. At this point, I mean, we have guys like Chris Howder, Armin Fati, Rafael Lovato Sr., and Pete the Greek. I mean, there were so many different events that we've kind of recorded it. Don't you think that's amazing? I mean, points of reflection and kind of going back for all the students to see what really happened and refresh their memory.
Yeah, I think it's great, you know, being able to go back and look at all these high-level practitioners, Octavio Cudo, like one of the names you didn't mention. And I mean, just these guys that have been doing this for so long come in, teach these amazing seminars and workshops, and it's all recorded and there for you to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get additional savings on all this, type in code RŌL Radio at the coupon and get additional 30% off of your membership.
Nice. Go to rolacademy.tv. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please hit the share, like, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you do listen. This ensures that we can continue bringing you the great guests and amazing content that you've come to expect. Today's guest joins the show to discuss the life that Jiu-Jitsu has provided him, the importance of enjoying the now, learning to keep calm in the eye of a storm, how an injury changed the direction of his life, and more. Here's the RŌL Radio with first degree gi black belt under Don Whitefield and first degree 10th Planet black belt under Nabil Salameh, and owner and instructor of 10th Planet Etobicoke, Micah Brakefield.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we're live. Micah, welcome to the show. First, thank you for being here, and thank you for being accepting of this mess that I have created over the last few days, scheduling and time zones and all that. So I appreciate you being patient with me, but I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So, new arrival at your household, not so new, but fairly new. How does it feel to be a father? How does fatherhood feels to you?
It definitely came at a really good time in my life, so it's just like a blessing. I could see it being like a super stressful situation if it was at almost every other time in my life, but now that things are a little more settled, it's been a really fun little adventure.
Well, that's awesome. You know, I'm a father myself, and I know it. There's always ups and downs. There's always this trade of time and how are things working. But I'm glad that you are joining the club, if you will. And I see you having your cappuccino or
yeah, just a little Nespresso all day. Yeah.
A little espresso all day.
Yeah.
How has life been so far? I mean, you've been on the mat for quite a bit. There's a lot of thoughts and experiences from that perspective, and you have your own place. And how is Jiu-Jitsu working out for you?
It's crazy, the life that Jiu-Jitsu has provided for me.
But wait a minute. We don't do anything. We just teach a class or two a day, and we just hang out and eat acai all day long, and then we surf occasionally, right? Isn't that the traditional plan?
That's the dream. Yeah, no, but I almost am living that ish because I have two business partners that I own the gym with, and one does like the Muay Thai side of things. I do the Jiu-Jitsu side of things, and then we have a guy who does all the sales, and then it's kind of a teamwork on the back end stuff, but I am less involved in that. So I really do have like a pretty like solid life right now, just doing mostly jiu-jitsu and hanging out with my child.
Is that how you envisioned this before starting the business, before you getting into this business ownership part and having your own place where you're going to just do jiu-jitsu essentially and kind of life fits in all around that?
Yeah, it sounds dumb, but I did. I really I really did. I never put a lot of like thought into how the opening of a gym process was going to happen. Like I always just like worked enough to train and do like jiu-jitsu as much as I could and like fight MMA. But I always wanted to have a gym, but I always just thought it would happen either I would have matches that got me enough money to kind of like open a gym on my own, or I would partner with someone who's a little more business orientated and I could be the more martial artist side of it, and which ended up happening. But I did really want and kind of like think that this was not to like this degree, I don't think, but I was really like all in on this being what was hopefully going to happen.
In other words, you're living the dream.
Yeah, I really am living like my dream for sure. Like I don't think it would have been a lot of people's dream, and I think if you told a lot of people that you could like have my life with like, you know, like I own a gym now, I have a house, like a car, I have like a pretty cool life if you look at it from the outside, but if you explain to people like the trials and tribulations that it took to get what I have now, I don't think a lot of people, even knowing the outcome, would put themselves through what I did. But for me, luckily, it was like a lot of fun.
Well, elaborate on that a little bit, because again, what people see is not necessarily what is happening, and by saying we live a dream, we are experiencing this ultimate point of success at this point of time. Oftentimes, it's not being seen what it took to really get to that point. What was one of the more difficult things for you to enjoy this life as it is today?
There was just a lot of like when I finished like wrestling in college, I didn't like finish college. I was like Kanye West. I decided I was finished, and I kind of just continued to wrestle. I realized I was getting to do a lot of the wrestling trips with a school I didn't go to, and I was like, I should just make money and do this, because I knew school wasn't really for me. I felt like I was kind of just like wasting my time and my like teacher's time and my like peers' time. I would go to class and like do enough to pass, but it like had no interest to me in life, and I didn't feel like it was going to be involved in my life at all. So I kind of just stopped going to school and started working and wrestling, and I then started like fighting MMA after like the college competitions kind of were done. And I don't know, I would fight people for like, when I went pro, I was like fighting people for like $500, and I like needed $1,000. Like when I was fighting for $500, like it wasn't like I would win the fight and then have like money for stuff. It was like I was still like in the hole, but I really like enjoyed the process. I remember my parents asking me one time, like, don't you want to like have money to go on vacation? And I was like, I don't need a vacation. I really enjoy this. So
was that? I guess I'm trying to kind of put myself in that situation. Was that more of being careless in the earlier stage of life, or was this simply enjoying the life at this particular moment and not caring what might happen?
I really think it was just enjoying the process. Like Forrest Gump was my favorite movie growing up. I feel like I took a lot of life lessons from Forrest Gump, like just enjoying the process, enjoying the now. You only have one now. You're only like young, able to like, you can't fight in a cage forever. But I was lucky enough to be like athletic enough and like inclined to do so. So I got to like live a pretty cool life and do pretty cool things and like have some pretty cool stories to tell, I think.
Well, one of the interesting part about your life as I was digging into it and doing some research before this conversation is that unlike most of the guests on the show, you have a quite large diversity of experiences, if you will. You've done MMA, you've been in a cage. There's a lot of no gi. There's some gi, and all of these things kind of cross between each other and at different points of your life. Why such a diversity? Why not stick to one thing like many do in jiu-jitsu?
For me, I think if you can look at like any problem in life, like even outside of jiu-jitsu, and you can have like a well-rounded perspective and you can look at it from many different points of view, you can really have like a valuable opinion on the matter. And I can look at grappling and I can see it from a wrestling point of view. I can see it from a jiu-jitsu point of view. I can see it from a no-gi point of view, an MMA point of view. I feel like I have and honestly, a lot of my grappling goes back to like wrestling with my brothers on the couch at home. Like, I have 3 brothers. 2 of them were like national and provincial champions in wrestling growing up. And like, we would just wrestle around at the house, and jiu-jitsu is trying to stay safe and calm when you have like a bigger wrestler basically trying to beat you up. So I was doing jiu-jitsu without like the words of jiu-jitsu when my brother was like pinning me on the couch, and I was like, there was no chance of me like beating him back up. It was like me trying to like get to a position where I could breathe and be comfortable and not like have my arms ripped away from my body.
I can only imagine those afternoons. Where do you fit in the age bracket for between all your brothers?
I'm the 3rd of 4, so the 2nd youngest.
The 2nd youngest. So
yeah.
the other 2 older ones were beating their crap out of each other?
Nah, the oldest one was a little smaller and less athletic. He played football and stuff, but he never wrestled. So it kind of started. The one just older than me was a really good athlete. He wrestled in university, and he was like bigger than me and stronger. And then my little brother was quite a bit smaller than me and less athletic, but he was like really into like the nerdy side of it. I think if he would have come up doing jiu-jitsu instead of wrestling, he would be like a little like Nicky Ryan sort of like.
Oh.
He was just like really good at wrestling, and I don't think he was like necessarily as good of an athlete as I was.
How did the dynamic between all 4 of you, or particularly maybe the 3 of you that continue grappling and wrestling between each other, how did that dynamic continue unfolding as years went on? I mean, obviously you ventured into jiu-jitsu. Some of them didn't. Or do any of them do jiu-jitsu at this point in time, or have they done it?
Both of those 2 have done it. They don't do it. My little brother had like a stage doing a little later where he was starting to like, he had a friend who was doing it, and they were both kind of nerding out on it, but he works a lot. And then he ended up moving a little further away from the gym, and his friend got an injury. So they stopped, and he kind of just fizzled out. And then my older brother, he wrecked his shoulder wrestling and had to kind of like retire from wrestling. And then when I started fighting MMA, he would come to the fights, and you could tell he's like, oh, I want to try jiu-jitsu. And he would like, he's wearing a white belt that was tied wrong, and you would see like the fear in these like purple belts' eyes when they would start rolling with, and they would just, what is happening? Like he's just got like the strongest hands in the world. He's a fisherman and does construction. And he just like has really strong hands.
We'll talk about that wrestling versus jiu-jitsu in a moment, because I really want to dip into that. But tell me, how did that dynamic between 3 of you, grappling on the floor and on the couches and doing all that in the younger times, how was that unfolding? I mean, who has the upper hand here? Who is the sneaky one? Who is the instigator here? It has to be very brotherhood-like when you guys are engaging in these things.
Yeah, I think we would all tell the story probably very differently.
Sure.
My older brother was like the biggest and the strongest, and he, at that point, like I got to that point later, but like when he was in grade 12, he was like the best guy on the wrestling team. His only other like person who was like as good as him-ish growing up was a year older than him. So when he was grade 12, it was like he was basically like an assistant coach of the team. And then he would like wrestle, but he didn't like have anyone to like really like roll with hard. So I would be that person a lot of the time. And like I would have a hard time like competing against him because he was my older brother. So he would just like, I would like, I feel that way now when I like have like students roll with me sometimes where they're like, they don't try that hard because they don't think it's going to work. And then so he like found out that like if he could get me really mad or like frustrated, that it could like, I would be like hard to handle because I was like a strong like grade 10 like stringy kid who like knew how to wrestle. And so he would just like try to get me really frustrated so that we could have hard rounds. So that ended up being like, I feel like the start of my jiu-jitsu because it was like, no, I was like not wrestling. I was trying to like stay calm so I didn't have to like freak out and wrestle him as much.
Did that work for him well in the sense of, did you get annoyed often or
yeah. Yeah, I would like, I think now people think of me as like a pretty calm person who doesn't get, but I feel like as like a younger child, I was like very energetic, very like spazzy. And my brother who like still like family knows how to do it, but like he could push my buttons. He knew how to start. And it wasn't like if we started a 3-minute round, he was like picking on me fresh. He had like years of stuff to like go back on and like get me frustrated really quick.
It sounds like a very interesting brother-like dynamic that is unfolding between three of you specifically during that time. At which point are you starting to think that you want to venture into this jiu-jitsu thing? So like, I mean, clearly there is this grappling with brothers, then there is some wrestling that takes place for you, and then this ventures into more jiu-jitsu like. What does that point look like? When was that?
I remember in grade 12 telling my girlfriend's dad that I was going to like fight MMA. And he was just like he was like, no, that's so dumb. Like, no, you're smarter than that.
What year is this?
2005.
Okay, so fairly early on. I mean, UFC 1 is 193. 2000, that's just a handful of years later. So UFC is not even that developed at that point in time.
No, I think the Ultimate Fighter like had really like kind of just like that first season had just happened. Like, yeah. But like, I remember just being so sure. I was like, no, I'm going to do that. And he was like like a surgeon. He was like a real smart guy. And he was just like, no, like,
why would you do that?
No, you're like smarter than that. And I just like looked at him. I was like, I'm not. Like, I know it's dumb, and I'm going to do that. And so I wrestled. I didn't do any jiu-jitsu in university or college or anything, but I wrestled, and then I did. I actually did a jiu-jitsu tournament in the summer before I did a pancration tournament. So my friend and I signed up for a jiu-jitsu tournament, and we did it
with no jiu-jitsu.
None. I used his old karate gi. And he was like pretty small guy, so it was hilarious. But it fit ish, and it like
if ish,
yeah. And then I did a pancration tournament where it's like watered down MMA, where a few wrestlers on my team had done it the year before, and they kind of just like took people down and wrestled them, and then like won like boring wrestling matches. And I was like, so when I went to do it, they're like, all right, so we're gonna take them out. I was like, no, like. I wrestle wrestlers. I'm not going to try and like wrestle like normies. I want to try and like fight them. And so I did like pretty good in the little tournament. I ended up winning. So I was like, I'm all in. And then I did like 2 MMA fights. And after my second MMA fight, some guys came up to me and they're like, hey, we heard you're fighting Dwyer next. Like, he's pretty good. You should like train. Like you should like if you teach us wrestling, we'll teach you jiu-jitsu.
So wait a minute, let me get this straight. You do jiu-jitsu tournament, pancration tournament. You do 2 MMA fights with 0 training.
Well, I'd wrestle. I wrestled. I had a
Well,
lot
yeah,
of,
I mean, I'm
yeah.
taking kind of wrestling aside, but besides a formal training in those disciplines, in those arts or sports, you do all these things.
Yeah.
Take me back to that first jiu-jitsu tournament in a karate gi. Why jiu-jitsu tournament? Why that? Why not a wrestling event? Why
Well,
putting your gi on?
I just wrestled already, and I knew I was going to do that pancration tournament, and I knew I wanted to like do a fight.
So was that a prep for your pancration?
I guess, yeah. Like, I don't even know. Like, my roommate at the time was, he ended up, he was like quite a few years older than me. He was like 3 years older than me. So he was like he like ended up becoming a chiropractor. So he was already like, he had a car, and he was like, had money to like do stuff outside of like training. And he was like, let's go do this tournament. And I was like, okay. And then so we ended up just driving up to like North Vancouver and like doing it.
What are your thoughts when you actually there? You're putting your gi on. You're about to, do these matches in jiu-jitsu tournament. I assume you've never had a gi on at this point.
No.
You coming off of a wrestling like environment and mentality, and you entering this jiu-jitsu event. What are your thoughts in your mind at that point of time?
One, it was like a little bit different world back then, but like in my head, I was like frustrated that they wouldn't let me compete with like the black belts, with the experts. And
okay.
Because I was just like, you can like look around a room and see people, and it felt like people like nervous at beginning wrestling tournaments.
Yeah.
And I had like wrestled in university dual meets in like big colleges in the States and stuff, and it just like wasn't, it just felt like I was at like a novice thing. So then when they like, it just like wasn't fair when I was going against like white belts my size, because they were like under a year into like grappling, and I had grappled for like, like 12, 13 years at this point. And so I would be like holding the wrist, and I was literally like grabbing their gi and like looking at the ref. I'm like, and I would like pull it around their neck, and I was like, I'm allowed, and they'd be like, yeah, and I'd be like, and then they would tap, and it was like, but it was like, it was there. Like now I feel like when you watch white belt tournaments, like people get it. Like people, like you see people come in on their first day, and they know the positions, they regard, and you're like, have you done this before? And they're like, no, I watch the UFC all the time with my friends. And like, it just like wasn't as much like that when I first did it, I think. And I also just had ignorance is bliss. Like when I did my first MMA fights, I literally thought that I was going against like a kickboxer who had never done MMA. And then I was a wrestler who had never done MMA, and we were doing it. And then I was like, I went, and when I was trained at that gym before my third fight, I was like, what's going on? You guys all do you guys know what's happening. I was just like the first time I was in a cage was when it was like locked with me in it. And I was just like, this is different. And then I ended up choking the guy in like a minute. And then it was just like, oh, but it was like, I still had like no idea about MMA when I was like getting ready for my third fight, walking into like a gym full of people who like all knew jiu-jitsu and all knew kickboxing, and they could kind of wrestle. Like,
do you think that's because the awareness of MMA at that point of time was so much smaller? The footprint of the sport was so much smaller? Or do you think that this is simply the factor of being your first fight and it just being, the beginnings?
It was for sure like a different-ish world back then, but I was just like, I just like strolled into it like it was like my party already, and just people were like, what's happening? And I don't know, I do feel like I could walk into it again with like me back then walking into it, and it would be like similar. I had like a really weird wrestling style that was more like jiu-jitsu, but it wasn't jiu-jitsu, and I like wasn't phased by things. So I was just able to like walk in, and people would be trying to punch me, and I would just be like, well, I'm going to tackle them eventually. And then I would just grab them and do it. And it was like looking at those like videos now, it almost doesn't even seem like me. I was at MMA fights the other day watching my friends fight, and it like seemed crazy watching them walk into the cage and fight. And then I like told someone that, and they're like, you did this so many times. And it like made sense, but it didn't.
Little pieces together, like building these experiences gives us this, I guess, knowledge. Not, I guess, it certainly does. And like we become a little bit smarter here and there. What is one of the biggest lessons that you learned throughout all of this? Wrestling with your brothers, wrestling in school, doing these MMA fights which clearly you were not prepared for at that point of time, at least.
Yeah.
Do you recall one that was a big lesson?
I just think the whole thing is like my like 12-year-old self, like starting that like search to try and like not be spazzy and learning how to like calm down. And there's like, if you can be calm in an MMA fight, you can be calm anywhere. And it was like, it just seemed like the ultimate test of being able to be calm. Like, I don't think it's like impressive to be able to like meditate in a room full of people meditating and stay really calm, or like be by a waterfall by yourself and stay really calm. Well, that's like a cool thing to do. It's not like a test of yourself. I think being calm in the eye of a storm is like a very worthwhile like thing to try and like master.
Is that what you have mastered over this entire time?
No, I don't think I get nervous before big matches. I still like, I can work myself up into being so nervous that I throw up even now, like before like some tournaments, before super fights. Like, I don't think I'm at my like ultimate calm self yet, but I still feel like the anticipation before a match of like needing to prove myself in that match so that I can like earn a chance to be able to get other matches and competitions. And I remember asking Richie Boogeyman Martinez, like, when that kind of went away for him, because like we were both at a submission underground, and I was like, I just want to get to the point where I feel like even if I lost a match, like I would get more matches, and like then I feel like I could calm down and be less nervous. Like, when did that happen for you? And he was like, brother, I'm nervous I'm still nervous every time. And what do you mean? Like, you are at that point. This is like your 10th time here. I'm only on my second event. But I don't know. I think I probably would stop doing jiu-jitsu. I think if there wasn't like, if I couldn't find something in it that did it, like that's the whole point of it. I don't think there's like I don't think it's like golf where you can have a hole in one or a perfect match. Like, I think you're trying to like learn how to be like a better you through a sport. And I don't think that's a journey that ends.
You describe these butterflies and the points of nervousness before a match or a tournament. And you even mentioned Boogeyman, who still has the same experiences. Many who just starting, many who are just stepping, perhaps in the very first tournament in their life, you know, obviously their anxiety is much higher than the one who has experience. Where are the big differences, or how do you deal with the situations like this? Even though you are still nervous, I feel like we've experienced this. There is a point of anticipation. We know how to manage this, perhaps is a good phrase here.
Yeah.
What's your secret?
I think the feeling is the same. I think you just learn how to laugh at it. At least for me, I remember I was cornering my like coach at the time in an MMA fight, Caleb Starnes, where he had fought in the UFC. He was like the guy at one point for Canada, kind of had a fall from grace, but training with him, like I knew the level he was on, and he was fighting a guy who I was kind of like gearing up to fight. Like, he was like 5-0 when I was 2-0. And I thought he was like very much a guy that I could like fight and beat. And then Caleb ended up signing to fight him. And I was like, well, this is a mixed match. Like, and then I was taping Caleb's hands and they were like a little clammy. And he looked at me and he goes, my legs feel like they're 1,000 pounds. I feel like I'm going to gas out. I want to shit myself. And he goes, I know these feelings aren't real, but I'm still like, I just have to know that they're not real. And that really helped me, seeing like a guy who was super experienced going into a situation that to me seemed like a walk in the park. And he was like, no, this is a fist fight in a cage, and it's terrifying. And I feel that, but I know that I'm prepared. I know that when the fight starts, I'm going to be good. And it definitely helped because I should have known that. Like, I knew in wrestling matches, I would get really, really nervous, and I would like puke before a wrestling match, but I perform. I know I perform. And I like in wrestling, I could know. I just like, I would puke and not care. And I would be like, it would almost like amp me up because I'd be like, now watch. But in MMA, it was like, it felt more. But watching Caleb go through that, it really helped me just enjoy the process and just kind of laugh at yourself. Like, you choose to be there.
Do you think that's a learned skill, meaning in a sense of that, this is coming, I'm going to ignore this, I'm going to do this anyway, or it is just like body reaction of anxiety of being at these points of time? Like, can we learn to react in a specific way?
I would argue that we learned every reaction we have. I know there's a lot of like natural instinct involved in things, but no one knew how to talk. No one knew how to play piano. No one knew how to walk. Like, every single thing you do is a process of learning, and you just aren't aware of the learning process you had because a lot of it you did before you were like a conscious being. But you can learn everything. I think I was a very spazzy 12-year-old, and they tried to like, I got diagnosed with ADD, ADHD. They tried to put me on Ritalin. I took it, and it made me like an A student like this. And then I told my mom I didn't like it. I felt like I was underwater, and it was like, it didn't feel like me. And I got really lucky, and they just told me I didn't have to take it. And I think like that was like a branch that saved me. But I also like finding wrestling and like learning how to, and wrestling was just an avenue to stay in shape for football. Football was the only thing I wanted to do. I was going to play football in college. I ended up shattering my leg in rugby at the end of grade 11, and then was too slow in grade 12 to play football at like a really like good level. I was still like competitive on my team and stuff, but I wasn't going to be getting looked at to play university. So I ended up wrestling. I don't know. I think just like having a good attitude, kind of like Forrest Gump, and just like going with the flow. I think I was kind of like meant for this life, but I really did just kind of like smile and wave at a bunch of like shitty situations that I like, in hindsight, they're like the building blocks that like made me have a house with like books behind me. So it's pretty cool.
It is kind of pretty cool. And I didn't even know about the football desire there, or the accident that you're describing. But isn't it kind of ironic how you wrestle to stay in shape for football, then the rugby accident takes place, and all of this puts you back on the mat of wrestling, which leads you into fighting in cage, and then ultimately jiu-jitsu, which you do for a living today.
Yeah, it's like the Chinese farmer proverb. I don't know if you've heard it, but just like stuff keeps happening, and everyone's like, "Oh no," and he's like, "I don't know," and then good stuff happens.
I don't know,
like, I don't know. And it's just like you got to let things unfold. And I feel like that was one of the positive things I had was as like young, like 15, 16. I kind of like. I definitely didn't understand compound interest when it came to like money or anything, but I did get the like I think that's what wrestling was really good for, was we would like journal and set goals at the beginning of the year and like figure out ways to achieve those goals. And you could just like look at things on a little bit longer scale than like, am I going to be tired at the end of this match? Like, you were doing that tired at the match to like build for something months away.
Have you ever thought of what would happen or what your life would look like if you never injured your knee in that rugby match?
I haven't wasted too much time on it because college football probably would have been a lot cooler than college wrestling. I remember being on the track one morning for wrestling, and we were like cutting weight at the time, and the football team was practicing on like the inside of the field. Mm-hmm. And a quarterback was playing like catch with the receiver, and the ball ended up like by us. And I picked it up, and like instead of tossing it to the receiver right by me, I threw it to the quarterback. And one of the wrestlers on the team, he looked at me, he goes, "Why do you wrestle?" And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "If I could play any other sport, I would do those other sports. Like, do you think those football players are ever hungry?" And I was like, no, I don't think they're ever hungry, actually. And we were all just like hungry, thinking about we were all getting ready to like go down for a tournament.
What an interesting perspective on all of this. Where do you think you would be if you would go down that path of football? Do you think you would ever come across jiu-jitsu?
I don't know. I'm all in on things I do. I think I probably would have played football as long as I could. I think coaching was probably in the cards for me in a lot of like. I like had the benefit of having a lot of good coaches my whole life. Like my dad was my coach for a lot of sports, and he was a really good coach. I saw the benefit of coaches in people's lives. Like there's like, I think for a lot of people it can be a teacher, but I think a lot of people who are more like me, who are like energetic and not necessarily like classroom learners, they like really benefit from a person who's like knowledgeable in their sport and who has like learned to use that sport to like make their life cool.
A moment ago you talked about the first tournament, and you said, I made a note of it, you said that you felt that life was not fair, or that event was not fair. With having over a decade of experience, you are facing guys who are novice. They maybe they've never done it, or they've done it on a very minimal level, and the competitive levels were not the same. You were kind of offset to the side, and they didn't even let you fight more advanced brackets. Do you think that, and it might be a little controversial here, but do you think the guys entering with the wrestling experience into jiu-jitsu world setting unfair environment in the academy or the tournament, doesn't matter where it is, because of the experience they have?
No, I think it gets muddy when you go to like competitions, but like I was a white belt for me. I remember my coach when I was still a white belt, but I had like won quite a few MMA fights by submission. I had won every jiu-jitsu tournament I had done. And then I remember him coming up to me and being like, "You're going to be like frustrated over the next little bit." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "There's going to be people getting their blue belts and even purple belts, and who like maybe a brown belt who you feel like you're like competitive with or can already like be better than. But this is like a individualized journey. And if your black belt is here, it's got to be scaled incrementally, and your like blue belt is going to be way higher than people because you're starting with experience." And I definitely get that now as a coach. I think I got a pretty good grasp of it then. I had like a love-hate relationship with the belts throughout jiu-jitsu, kind of not caring and then caring and then not caring. And then, I don't know, it's been an interesting trip for sure. But I think wrestlers they have a lot of things that make them way better than other people. But so does like a really athletic, like CrossFit person is going to move their body in certain ways. You're going to have someone who like kickboxed who is going to have a really good arm bar because it's a switch kick. Like,
do you think all these disciplines, but particularly wrestling, give us an advantage from a starting point when we are just beginning this jiu-jitsu journey?
Yeah, I think as frustrating it may be, the more you narrow your focus and limit the amount of things you can do, you get way better at it. And wrestling is jiu-jitsu without submissions. So it takes off the go into your back too, but it is like learning to control someone. And like in wrestling, you're trying to like break, like you're still trying to make someone quit. Like your goal in wrestling is to score points and do stuff, but you're trying to make like a person physically quit. You're trying to like make their eye dart over at the clock, and then you know that person is broke, and like you can get energy back from it, even if you were on the brink of death, because he looked first and he said he was tired, and you can go and get him. And I think wrestlers have like innate ability to sense when someone is tired or broken, because we don't have the tools in wrestling to like physically hurt someone. So you're trying to just tire them out and find their breaking point. And that's the base of all jiu-jitsu and MMA, is trying to make another person not be able to think clearly.
That's a very interesting description. I've never thought about it in that sense. I always thought about wrestling being more of the objective meaning being winning the match, scoring or pinning in a sense. But what you are describing is essentially writing them out, just controlling to the point when they have no more options. The tap necessarily doesn't exist, but they can give up mentally. Is that what you're describing?
In most wrestling matches, like most MMA fights,
Yeah.
the tap is mental. The physical tap ends up happening after, or the pin, or the like. But a lot of times pins happen because that person knew there was no way out, and it was kind of an easier way out. And in MMA in particular, I'd say like 90% of rear naked chokes are not because the person's jiu-jitsu was better. It's because that person was done, and that was their way out.
Do you think that makes it a little bit easier in jiu-jitsu perspective, that we can essentially reset, reset, and start over any given time, versus in the other situations you're describing, there's more of a, you got to be checked out mentally. Like you got to, like that occurs first before that physical aspect of it.
Yeah, I think tapping has kind of become a little too common nature in like it should be hard to tap you when you're rolling, even if you're going like I think people like tap and reset a little too much, and I think wrestlers never had that option. So when you put wrestlers in a situation with jits guys, they're like, they kind of like know in their like in the back of their head that like this guy's gonna quit, and that makes it's so hard to do jiu-jitsu against someone who's very confident that you'll quit and they know how to defend themselves.
And even vice versa. If the wrestler is down, I'm pointing, jiu-jitsu guy is dominating, tapping the wrestler out is probably much harder because their mental state is, I'm not giving this up. I got plenty in to go. Wouldn't that be correct?
Yeah, I think no wrestler, maybe it's a little different now, but like 20 years ago, no wrestler in the history of wrestling did wrestling because it was like really cool, and they were gonna like get all the girls, and like they were gonna like make money. Like people wrestled because it was like a deep desire within them that they didn't really have a choice, and it like boiled out of them. And there's not a lot of sports where people do such an uncool, hard thing and make their whole life kind of revolve around it. So it's like a different breed of people who wrestle.
Why there is such a huge difference, even though the sports are so similar? If you compare grappling or no-gi versus wrestling, there's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of similarities. But why do you think that training is so much different? You walk into a wrestling room, you know you are in a wrestling room, like just mentally and physically. Why there's such a big gap between the way how we train versus how it's being done in a wrestling room? The way the mental state between those two individuals or those two groups, why there's such a huge gap?
The jiu-jitsu gym is geared towards making money, and to make money you need people to be happy and want to come back. Wrestling gyms, people are there out of their own free will, and they're gonna be there no matter how hard and how grimy it is. You don't need to have a clean setup and showers and like nice windows into the room. People who are going to wrestle aren't there. They're going to wrestle regardless. Like they would wrestle on a concrete floor in a dungeon that was wet. Jiu-jitsu people, and in the masses, when it's for money, is like you're trying to make a comfortable environment that people can have fun, and kind of like it's their etch-a-sketch for the day. They're like just as much there just to kind of like forget work and just kind of reset the next day.
Do you think that's the consequentially? Do you think that is the reason why wrestling is fading away after college? In a sense, there was not many adult clubs for wrestling versus jiu-jitsu. That kind of, it almost begins at that point, and they kind of convert over to each other.
I think a lot of sports are like that. Like you don't see like adult gymnastics. You don't see like adult like football. Like they're like sports that are like hard and for young people are like there when you limit the things you can do and you like have a bunch of constraints. It's just going to be bigger, stronger, faster, and that wears out fast. And because you can't go to your back in wrestling, you have to fight really hard. And when you're like 35 and have a bad back, it's kind of hard to fight off your back sometimes. And it's like you just can't like tigers don't live to be 30. Like, you don't get to live in the jungle and be old. And wrestling is a jungle, and jiu-jitsu is a city.
That's an interesting way to put it. That's an interesting way to put it. Wrestling is a jungle and jiu-jitsu is a city. How is that conversion from wrestling to jiu-jitsu for most of the guys? What have you seen at your place? What have you seen from your students? Is that hard, difficult conversion mentally and physically?
I think it's different for everyone. I get into this argument like once a week with one of my guys, Tyson, who is like a big advocate of freestyle or of collegiate wrestling, folk style wrestling. And I do think wrestling is like the best base for martial arts, but in my opinion, like pretty good wrestling or really good wrestling with some time off is a really good base for martial arts. But I don't think you want to go like straight from, I think Henry Cejudo would have been a much worse martial artist if he went straight off the Olympic mats and started jiu-jitsu and MMA. Because I think there's like things about wrestling, the gamification of trying to score points, that the point system is very different in jiu-jitsu from wrestling. Your goals are very different. If your goal is to score points, where if your goal is just to physically break a person, that goal like transfers over really well. And the people who are only trying to physically break someone in wrestling usually weren't like the Olympic champs, best in the world. They had like all the good things about wrestling and then kind of didn't have the things that were going to be a downside. But there's like things about how you would try to like rest and like game the wrestling system that are not dead ends in jiu-jitsu like they are in wrestling. So you think you're going to a dead end where you're gonna like hang out in the dark and like hang out with your friends and drink some beers, but then it's not. It's like a brightly lit street in jiu-jitsu, and someone's just gonna go to their back and like go right through that and put you in a triangle. So
So that conversion for many students must be difficult. Coming from a point of dominance, coming from a environment where it's very controlled and you know where are the dark streets and lit streets, and then you go into the jiu-jitsu room where things just flip-flop and it becomes, well, challenging at the least, right?
yeah, I think it's all just different for different people. It was like a very smooth transition for me because my wrestling was always like, I thought it was like jiu-jitsu. When I was like towards the tail end, I always had like a really funky style, like more like Ben Askren. And then when I started jiu-jitsu, people were like, what are you doing? And I was like, I wrestle, but I think it's like more like, and they're like, this is not jiu-jitsu, but it doesn't feel like wrestling. And so for me, it worked out well. But I see people who are like, especially like in Canadian or freestyle wrestling, like Olympic wrestling, where there's not as much ground wrestling, like in folk style, which I wrestled in university, was a lot more like ground and a lot more applicable to jiu-jitsu and MMA, I think. But the freestyle wrestling, where it's like you take someone down and you just basically stay on your stomach for 10 to 15 seconds and then they call you back up. I think people who come from that background have a harder time.
So with all these experiences that you've had between, some football and wrestling and your brothers at a home on the couch and obviously MMA and now semi-professional and professional jiu-jitsu and now being in business of jiu-jitsu, what are the big lessons that you learned over the entire time? What are the big lessons that you transfer to your students as you are the instructor and they look up to you?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that like Chinese proverb of not getting too caught up in the good or the bad of the moment, because if you end up hurting your shoulder, but if you keep practicing and you allow yourself just to only flow roll and not really roll hard because you have a hurt shoulder, you're like, your other arm's going to get way better at doing stuff, and you're going to learn how to do a bunch of moves that then when you bring your arm back into it, you're better. So if you can learn to accept the situation and then never admit defeat, accept the situation and make it better. And that's like, I think what jiu-jitsu is all about, for one, is just, it doesn't matter why you are where you are. It's about where you're going and where you need to be. And the way to get there is to calm yourself down so you can make the steps. Like even those like big spazzy movements you see when guys are like, it took a calm brain to like decide to do that, whether they knew they were making a decision or not. Like It starts with a calm brain.
Do you believe in things happen for a reason?
I don't know if it matters if I believe in them or not. I think I think you should act like they happen for a reason and act accordingly. But like I found recently when I'm doing jiu-jitsu, if I like pretend like one of my blue belts is watching, like one of my, like a good blue belt is watching, I find I'll do like perfect footwork and I like roll much better. So I think it's like good to pretend like someone's watching, whether you like believe in God or not. I think it's like good to believe that there's like people watching you and you should act accordingly. Like you should like pretend that there's a documentary being filmed on you and you want to like be a good example.
I think we all would be better people if we really thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Somebody's watching you all the time and, you know, there's a documentary being filmed on you. Because ultimately that's what we're doing, right? We're building our own legacy, right? I mean, our kids are going to talk about us. Our students are going to talk about us, right? I mean, at some point we all will expire and what we've done will build what the next generation will be, you know?
100%.
Yeah, it's such an interesting path where all of this started. And think about it this way. This entire conversation we are talking about what is happening, how we are taking things in a certain direction. But many would say this all started for you with this knee injury. That's what the pivot point was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I definitely bring that up to people a lot. Like things that seem like when I broke my leg, it was like the worst, the worst thing ever. I was pretty down in the dumps. I was not happy-go-lucky, Micah. I was very upset. Everything I had worked for was done. And but then when you like look back on it now, like I started playing football when I was like 7. I was 16 when this happened. I was like 9 years. I will have been like a black belt for 9 years in a couple years. Like 9 years is nothing, but when you're 16, it's the biggest thing in the world, and it's important to learn to just zoom out and realize that it's not important.
Do you think that event is a contributor to your very open mindset for life, in a sense of, you know, let's not dissect this, let's not stress and have anxiety over this particular moment, let's just see where this is going to go, because there will be new opportunities? I mean, I feel like at 16, a broken leg to that point, and even you recovering and being unable to perform to the level that was expected, really puts a lot of pressure on a young man at that age.
No, before I have memories of being me, I was me. Like my mom has a story of I was in a baseball game. I was like 10, 11 years old, and I was like the last person up. And if I got a hit and then we scored a run, we won the game. But I ended up hitting the ball, and a guy had like a diving catch, and he caught it, and I was out. And then I like walked off field, and my mom was like expecting me to like be all like sad, and I was just like, whatever. And then she goes like, well, that's too bad. And I was like, imagine if I was like that guy though, who made that catch. Like he got to win the game for his team. Like I did my job. I don't know. Like I hit the ball. It's not like I didn't hit the ball. That guy had his moment, and it was cool for him. Yeah. I was just always that kid. Like I remember the first time a 5-point throw ever happened in a wrestling match I was in. It was me getting 5-point thrown, and my dad got a picture of it, and I like found the kid at the tournament, and I was like, yo, what's your MSN? Like, check this out. And I like showed him a picture of me like upside down over top of him, and he was like, oh, cool. And his parents, I remember being like, why is he like so happy about this?
But it's all about seeing the positive in every situation, isn't it? I mean, some people might look at this as you are just, you know, way too positive. The reality of life is very different. But then, you know, you arguing the side that life is too short. Like there is always something good happening in everything that we do.
Yeah, and like there's a good in every situation. You might be on the shit end of the stick. You might not be getting but like there is another end of that stick. You're just not on it. But like you can live in a world where you can imagine yourself on that stick, or you can like, you don't always have to. That's like the beautiful thing about being like a human with an imagination, is like you can be in a dark room and you can picture something light. Like you don't have to. Reality is what you choose.
How do you transfer that mindset to your students? I mean, people come, people go.
not many achieve, the high skill set of what you have achieved, and many, depart for whatever reasons they are. How do you convert this positive, open-minded thought into your students and into your jiu-jitsu?
I just be me. I just try to like lead from the front. I don't know, those people who like take jiu-jitsu and then they quit at blue belt, like I often wonder if they're smarter than me and they learned everything they needed from jiu-jitsu in like 2 years, got their blue belt, and they're like, you know what? I can take things from this and like apply it to life. And it took me like 12 plus years of doing jiu-jitsu, and I'm like, I think I can find a way to apply this to life better.
But another example how you look at life, because I never thought about it that way. Yeah, maybe they're just smarter than us. Like,
well, they're probably not walking around with like broken ribs. Like,
I know
year.
that's what I was like. That's exactly what I was thinking about. Like, after over 2 decades being on the mat, like, my knees are not the same. My neck makes sounds every single morning. My shoulders move in different directions. Maybe these guys are just smarter than us, and not putting themselves through this wear and tear that we, we love to do this. And I'm doing this in air quotes, but maybe they're just smarter than us. Maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think like if you looked at the world from like most other points of view, I think you would like see the person that like just has a regular job and is probably doing like well, like financially, and isn't hurt all the time, and they'd be like, that guy has it figured out. But I think that guy knows in the bottom of his soul, if he did jiu-jitsu long enough to be a blue belt, he knows he's missing out because he knows there's people seeing the light.
Yeah. There's always this interesting, I guess, pivot to all of this. So where's life going for you? What's next? I mean, you have a newborn at home. Not so new, 9 months. So she's growing up nicely. Seems like you're living the dream. I mean, what's the next goal? What's the next pivot point? Or are we just coasting here?
I assume soon my like athletic goals will be ending, but I recently am on like the longest string of like my body feeling really healthy right now, and I feel like if like trials was today for ADCC, I would have like my best appearance. I really want to crack into that top 16 or that top 8. I want to be one of the guys still, and I feel like I know I roll with guys who are really competitive, who come to my gym and visit, and when I am on, I know I can roll with people. I know that I can like trick people, and I know I can submit the guys who are like up there with the best in the world, and that's still currently my goal. When I step on the mats every day, my goal is to be better at jiu-jitsu, and luckily I get to like run the room and choose what we're doing. And I think that someone who's really trying and chasing the goal for themselves, and I like happen to be like a non-selfish person, which is good for coaching and maybe not as good for being an athlete that's competitive, but I think it's really beneficial to the room to have someone who's just trying to like do it themselves.
Leading by example, being the general in the front. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. That's not my favorite nickname, but that seems to be like what the team always tries to call me when I compete, is the general.
Why don't you like it?
I don't know. I'm just one of the guys. I like.
But are you?
Yeah.
Let me challenge that. But are you? Are you just one of the guys, or are you the leader of the pack?
I try to be like lying on the mat with my shirt off in a pool of sweat afterwards, staring up to the point where like I'm obviously so tired that no one's going to ask me questions. Like I teach during class, but when we roll, I try to be like, we have like blue belts and purple belts who are like trying to murder me, and they're not thinking of me as a coach when they're rolling. It's really nice. They're trying to kill me, and I get really hard rolls, and I feel like when rolls start and I go, okay guys, we're doing 5-minute rounds, we're doing 10-minute rounds, we're doing 8-minute rounds. When that starts, I do feel like one of the guys still, and it's very fun just to be like lost in the sauce.
Do you think that they appreciate that more versus somebody who is up in the front and dictates what needs to be done?
Yeah, I think there's probably like a couple of schools in that. I know a lot of the like competitive like brown belts and black belts that come to the school fresh. Like we for sure have like white belts who come to the gym because we're a 10th planet and our salesman is good and we market well. But the like proof of like having like good competitive higher belt guys is because they're in there with someone they know that they can like walk in about and they can like trust that what I'm saying is real because I'm speaking from experience and I may not be telling you something that will work for you, but I'm for sure telling you something that has worked for me, and we can find a way to like take part of that and make it work for you at least.
Yeah, learn from each other. Yeah, I do love it. I love it. Listen, Micah, we've been at this for an hour, nearly an hour. Before we start wrapping this up, what I do at every episode is I have a question for you from a previous guest, but he had no idea that you will be answering the question. So think of it as question completely in blind. And on the previous episode, I had Steve Kwan from a Mental Jiu-Jitsu Models. So, and I know
do
you guys
that
know
we
each
train
other.
together? Yeah, like we.
I saw your message earlier this morning.
Yeah, we came, like the gym that he. I think he got his black belt there, and then he like. That's the gym that I started teaching wrestling at to train jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I didn't know that. What a small world.
Yeah.
What a small world. Well, so his question was, if you could change jiu-jitsu culture, what would it be? If you could make a change for jiu-jitsu culture or in jiu-jitsu culture, what would it be?
It's hard because like if you wanted to like have the like personal development and the stuff that I think of from like wrestling, like the answer would be like make it less cool. But like I wouldn't want that because I like you need it to appeal to the masses to like bring people in, and then got it. If I was gonna change jiu-jitsu culture, I would like want to like the like stupid divide between like gi and no gi, and people thinking it's like cool to like one and not the other, and like it's like so silly to me to like look at a situation that is obviously like you're looking at the exact same situation, grappling. One is in the gi and one is in no gi. Like that seems like a really good way to like get different understandings and different points of view of like the sport you're trying to do. So if you're trying to like, I don't think you have to do gi to get better at no gi. I'm not saying that, but I think if you train gi and no gi, you're going to have, and wrestling and judo, I think you're going to have like a more and you should do MMA. Like you shouldn't do, if you want to be a good jiu-jitsu competitor, you should do some MMA, not to do MMA, but you need to do rounds with MMA guys who are not doing jiu-jitsu with you, but you're trying to do jiu-jitsu, because we always do jiu-jitsu against people who are doing jiu-jitsu with us. And it's like, that's not a given. Like you need to be able to do your jiu-jitsu against someone who's not doing jiu-jitsu with you and they know how.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, all these different sports or engagement points give us different experiences, and we can draw some conclusions from each. We can learn a lot from each other, right? I mean, it between the anxiety and stress, being under pressure, making decisions, troubleshooting situations, we can all learn from this. Do you think that gi and no gi is kind of parting ways from each other?
I think it's all just trends. I think it'll like go together and go apart. I think there'll be someone like, didn't some guy that just did CJI, wasn't he like mostly a gi guy, or was he just mostly an IBJJF guy?
And I know the.
He's like Australian.
I'm not sure.
Well,
I know there were a couple of wrestlers. I know there were a couple of wrestlers entering CGI.
Yeah, I think it'll just take someone to break through who likes it. Like, I think it just got really popular because Gordon talked shit about the gi, and then it was like cool to not like gi. But someone will come along who's like a gi guy who competes in no gi, who will do really well, and people will be like, oh, maybe that is like there's something worth looking at. And like, I don't know, doesn't Marcelo Garcia train in the gi as well? Like, isn't he kind of like the best no gi guy ever?
Well, yeah. No, I mean, you can find these examples all the time everywhere. I mean, Hadra Gracie, same thing. I mean, it's like you can find these examples everywhere. I mean,
I think it's just trends. I think right now it's pretty cool to do one or the other, but I think like 3 months ago, people were saying wrestling is dead in the UFC and it's all strikers. And now you're looking at it and you're going,
Who was saying that? I think that like wrestling is a pivotal point for MMA in general. You got to know how to wrestle if you want to fight in the cage.
I think every time there is like 50% of the champs who are not wrestlers, strikers get this like weird delusion that all of a sudden it's like it's striking world. And you're like, nah, like look at the top 10. This is like a 95% dominated by guys with like really strong wrestling base. And there's like the occasional champ who comes up, but you know, like I would argue Jose Aldo had like maybe some of the best wrestling in MMA history. Never used, but like you can't take that guy down. And like, just because he didn't use it doesn't mean he doesn't have it.
Right, exactly. Oh, he used it so much that you don't even see it that he's using it, you know, from a defensive perspective. Like he makes it look so easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I love it. Micah, let's start wrapping this up. If anyone wants to connect with you, where are you located physically and virtually? Talk a little bit more about your accessibility. If anyone who's listening, any of the listeners want to connect with you, ask you questions about your life, about your story, and you know, maybe you visit even. Where are you at?
Yeah, I own a 10th Planet in Toronto, Canada. It's in a little suburb called Etobicoke that no one can pronounce and isn't even a real like city. There's no like governor. There's no like politicians for Etobicoke. It is just part of the greater city of Toronto. But
just wild west.
Yeah. So I'm at that gym every day, training and coaching, and online it's just Micah Brakefield. I have like Instagram and Twitter, but I like just like scroll the news on Twitter and Instagram. I'm like more active than I should be on it, but as I like move on to this next stage of kind of being like a full-time dad at home while my wife works, one of my goals is to be around my phone a lot less and reachable a lot less for big portions of the day while my daughter is like awake and with me.
Well, good for you. I mean, that's a big goal, and being present with our kids is so important. So, good for you, especially today when it's so difficult to disconnect from the digital devices. That's awesome.
Yeah, we never knew we were being mindful while we were waiting for the bus as kids, just staring at our feet. But we were all little like now people would look at us and think we were monks, just able to sit there and wait for a bus for 20 minutes with nothing happening.
One of the best times of my day is dropping my kids off at the bus and you know, having those small talks and small conversations and seeing them being monkeys. So it's the best is still ahead of you as far as the father is concerned.
Oh, no,
so enjoy every moment of it.
I'm very excited for that.
Enjoy every moment of it. All right, Micah, thank you for being here. Thanks for hanging out with me for this 60 minutes, 70 minutes. Thanks for sharing your life. Thank you for some of the wisdom that I made some notes on, and I think this was really, really, really great conversation. Thanks for sharing all this with me.
No, thank you for having me. I like the city and jungle comment I had. I like never had really thought about it that way either. So that's why it's always cool to like talk to someone you don't know, because you like use analogies you've never thought of because you're trying to relate to someone that you don't know. So you don't have like, I don't know if you did construction, so I can't use construction analogies. You got to just be looking in the dark for like ways to connect with someone. So thank you.
I love it. Let's wrap it up for today. Thanks for being here, and we'll be sitting on the sidelines and watching as you continue doing amazing things on your side.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.